Oh, okay. Gotcha.
All right, we're going to go and get started. Just a couple of reminders and announcements. And one is that if you didn't sign in on the way in, please make sure to sign in on the way out. There's sign-in sheets on either end of the front desk. Second, I just want to mention that if people notice the video camera back there, we're actually filming this session. I just want people to be aware of this because I don't think anybody should ever be filming without their knowledge. So we're filming this session. The primary purpose of filming this session is for a colleague who is in Bali at the moment. But who knows what else we might. There's also going to be an evaluation that you'll need to fill out, and maybe sort of about halfway through, I'll just we'll hand these out so everyone gets one of these. You can just leave them on your way out. So please remember the pink evaluation forms. And then finally, we're going to have door prizes. But we're just got little slips of paper for you to fill out with your name for the door prizes, but I see no such little slips of paper. So if you're interested in getting a door prize, you'll need to take out a little piece of paper yourself right now and write your name on it. And sometime during the session, we'll gather up the names for the door prize. Oh, and there's Haji is a hat. We use Haji's hat. Or not. So I want to thank everybody for coming to this session. Let's just get right to it. We're here today to discuss the crisis that we're all living through. And I use the word crisis purposely. We've all been through hard times before. The university has been through hard times before. The country has been through hard times before. But this feels different. And it feels different because it is different. Every generation or so, we go through a time period of intense stress, uncertainty, turmoil, the Great Depression of the 1930s, the upheavals of the 1960s. And I want to suggest that we are actually living through one of those moments now. We are living through a social crisis that's at a national and, in fact, even a global level. And these times of crisis breed great uncertainty and unease. And so when we feel great uncertainty and unease, that's actually kind of normal for the kind of times we're living through. But if we're going to respond constructively to a crisis, the first thing we need to do is to name that crisis and understand that crisis. So what we'd like to do today is to take a stab at naming and understanding the crisis that we are living through, and then having a discussion of the implications of that crisis for all of us who work and study at UW-Superior. So what I want to suggest is that this crisis we're living through is a crisis of an idea. And I'd like to give that idea a name. Let's call it market fundamentalism. And what I mean by market fundamentalism is a veneration of the market. This idea is also sometimes referred to as neoliberal economics. Some of you who are in political science or economics or history recognize that term. For our purposes, I think it's more helpful to call it market fundamentalism. A veneration, one could almost say a worship of the market. And this veneration of the market sort of takes two forms. On the one hand, those who subscribe to this idea assert that markets are, in all circumstances, efficient and effective at allocating resources. So the first aspect of market fundamentalism is a belief, an assertion, a faith in the efficiency of the market in all places at all times. And then the second aspect of market fundamentalism is a belief that there really is no value apart from market value. If a market cannot put a price on something, then that thing has no value. And I want to contrast market fundamentalism with, I think, another way of looking at things that was more traditional in the United States and in much of the world until relatively recently. And that's the idea that on the one hand you have the market, but that markets must be checked and balanced by the idea of a public good. Think of it almost as sort of a notion of checks and balances. That the market can be an efficient mechanism for allocating resources, but that markets must be checked and restrained and balanced by a public good. And this public good puts constraints on the market, And there are also certain things that have a public value that cannot have a price, a market price put on them. Think of a public park, for example, a public good. There is no market for a public park. Or the notion of the public good with the argument for having a regulated marketplace as opposed to an unrestrained marketplace. And for most of the 20th century, this idea that markets must be checked and balanced by a public good was the dominant idea in this country. And interestingly, Wisconsin was one of the places that sort of pioneered that idea. It was sort of central to the progressive heritage of Wisconsin in the early 20th century, the idea that markets and the public good balance and check each other. But over the last generation, the last 10 or 20 years, in the United States and in much of the world, that idea of markets and a public good that balance and check each other is being increasingly replaced and displaced by market fundamentalism, the idea that the market is the transcendent good. And the most extreme or radical version of market fundamentalism actually denies the existence of a public good entirely. And I think if we think of this concept of market fundamentalism, it helps us sort of make sense of a lot of the ideas that are out there that we hear, that sometimes those of us who believe in a public good find kind of odd and strange. They're strange to us because they're coming from people who really don't subscribe to the notion that there is a public good. They see the market as the creator of all value. So I think what we're living through on this campus, in this country, and actually around the world is the crisis of this idea. At a global level, market fundamentalism in 2008 brought the global economy to the brink of utter and total catastrophe. We saw the consequences, for example, of financial markets that were unrestrained by the idea of a public good. And I think that we should keep in mind in this whole discussion of what we're living through on this campus, that broader global crisis of this idea. But my comments are going to focus on the impact of market fundamentalism on the university. And to illustrate the crisis of market fundamentalism on UW Superior, I've got some graphs, okay? Get us on the first graph. Graph number 1. This is the percentage of the UW budget, the UW system budget, system in all the campuses, the percentage of the budget that comes from state taxes, starting in 1977 and going up to 2010. I don't think I have to elaborate much on what this shows. 47% to just about 21%. But this is what I think this graph really shows. This graph shows the gradual privatization of the UW system. We have been gradually moving in the direction of transforming the UW system from a public university system to a private university system that receives a public subsidy. We never actually had that debate openly and publicly in the state, but gradually that is what is happening without any public discussion of that being done. Now, back when 47% of the budget came from tax dollars, this was viewed as a public investment. That was the rationale for that expenditure. The state invested in students in the belief that by developing the human potential of the people of the state, that would later pay dividends to the state. This was not a gift to students from the state. This was an investment in their potential that was assumed to later pay dividends to every person in the state. Thus, public higher education was largely publicly funded.
Do you know how this compares with other states or the national average?
I don't have the exact figures, but it reflects national trends. This is going on everywhere. So I haven't done the actual comparisons, but we are typical in terms of the general pattern.
At a COPLAC meeting, the COPLAC will all have similar.
Yep.